Rain came down like a curtain of iron, swallowing the road, the hedgerows, and every distant light beneath an October sky. Inside the carriage, Lady Evelina Wycliffe held her newborn son against her breast and listened to the wheels hammer the flooded road. Thomas was only weeks old. His tiny fingers curled against her collar, his warm breath the only comfort left to her. She had not cried when Edmund told her she would be leaving. But now, with every mile carrying her farther from Wycliffe Hall, fear pressed cold fingers around her heart. Beneath her cloak, her hand closed around the small leather pouch hidden against her waist. The ledger was still there. Edmund had searched her room. He had torn open drawers, overturned trunks, and accused her of theft with a smile that frightened her more than anger ever could. He had not found it. Yet he had understood enough. She had discovered what no wife was ever meant to discover. The charming Lord Wycliffe had built his fortune upon deception, bribery, and blood. Worse, the murder that had poisoned the Ravenscroft and Wycliffe families for 15 years had not been the work of some nameless enemy. Edmund had ordered it. Alistair Ravenscroft's younger brother had died because Edmund wanted the two houses at war. Evelina had confronted her husband with the ledger in her hand. She remembered his expression. Not guilt. Not fear. Amusement. "You should have remained ignorant," he had said. Then he had ordered the carriage prepared. The carriage lurched violently, and Thomas woke with a thin, desperate cry. "Hush, darling," Evelina whispered, drawing him closer. "Mama is here." She looked through the rain-streaked window. There was no village ahead. No lantern. No farmhouse. Only black trees bending beneath the wind. The carriage slowed. Then stopped. The door opened. The driver stood outside, pale beneath his hat. "Where are we?" Evelina demanded. He would not answer. "Lady Wycliffe, you must get down." She stared at him. "No. I was ordered to." By whom? She already knew. Edmund. He had decided that the evidence mattered more than his wife. A storm, a lonely road, and a helpless woman would accomplish what a knife might not. Evelina stepped down into ankle-deep mud. The carriage door slammed behind her. "Wait." She struck the wood with her palm. "Please?" The driver looked away. The horses moved. The wheels splashed black water across her dress. Then the carriage vanished into the darkness. Evelina stood motionless. Rain streamed from her hair and soaked through her gown. Thomas began crying again, his little face reddening with hunger and cold. "All right," she whispered. "We will survive." She walked. The road disappeared beneath mud and darkness. Her strength failed slowly, then all at once. When she finally saw the enormous oak ahead, its ancient branches spreading like a roof against the storm, she staggered toward it. She sank beneath its roots. Thomas whimpered. Evelina opened her cloak, shielding him as best she could, and began to nurse him. The rain found every gap. Her hands shook violently. She pressed her cheek against his damp hair. "You must live," she whispered. "Do you hear me? You must live even if I cannot." Her eyes closed. For one terrible moment she allowed herself to imagine dying. Then she heard hoofbeats. A horse emerged from the curtain of rain, black as the night itself. Its rider wore a dark coat, his face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. Evelina looked up. Lightning tore across the sky. The rider dismounted. She knew that face. Duke Alistair Ravenscroft stood before her. The man whose brother her husband had supposedly murdered. The man whose family had spent 15 years despising hers. The man she had once loved beneath another name. His gaze fell first upon the baby, then upon Evelina's soaked, exhausted face. Something hardened in his expression, but it was not hatred. It was alarm. He removed his gloves. "Lady Wycliffe," he said quietly. Evelina tried to rise, but her knees failed. Alistair caught her before she struck the ground. Then his eyes met hers. "Evelina," he murmured, as though the name itself had awakened some buried wound. Her breath caught. He looked toward the empty road, then back at the child trembling in her arms. "Who abandoned you?" Alistair drew off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her and the baby, shielding them from the rain. "You may hate me tomorrow," he said, lifting Thomas carefully into his arms. "You may blame me for everything your family has suffered. But tonight you are coming with me." Evelina stared at him, unable to understand the mercy in the hands that should have been capable of revenge. As Alistair carried her son beneath the ancient oak, the silver pendant at her throat slipped free from her soaked dress. His eyes fell upon it. He stopped. 5 years earlier, he had placed that pendant around the neck of a young woman who had called herself Eva. His face went utterly still. "Where," he whispered, Did you get that? Alistair did not ask permission before lifting Evelina onto his horse. She was too weak to protest. One arm clung to the saddle, the other remained wrapped around Thomas, while Alistair mounted behind her and gathered the reins. His body became a wall against the rain. For several minutes neither spoke. The storm filled the silence with thunder, wind, and the steady drumming of water against leather. Alistair could feel Evelina trembling despite the coat around her shoulders. He remembered another woman who had once trembled beneath an oak, though that memory belonged to a life he had buried. He hated that the thought had returned. He hated even more that he could not stop looking at her. Lady Evelina Wycliffe had always been described as elegant, proud, and distant. Society called her a perfect aristocratic wife. Yet the woman before him was barefoot beneath a soaked hem, exhausted from childbirth, and holding a child as though her own life were insignificant beside his. No calculation could explain that. When they reached the hunting lodge, Alistair carried Thomas inside himself. The servants froze. Their duke had arrived in the middle of a storm carrying the infant son of his sworn enemy. "Fire," Alistair ordered. "And blankets. Send for Dr. Mercer. Tell him it is urgent." No one moved quickly enough. Now. The household sprang into motion. Evelina was guided toward a chair beside the hearth, but she resisted when a maid reached for Thomas. "I can hold him." "You need warmth," Alistair said. "I said I can hold him." Her voice was quiet, yet there was steel beneath it. Alistair studied her. Even half-frozen, she guarded the child with fierce determination. "You are not being separated from him." Something in his tone made her look up. He turned away before she could read his face. An hour later, the worst of the storm still raged outside, but the lodge had become warm. Thomas slept near the fire, wrapped in fresh linen. Evelina wore a plain wool dress belonging to Alistair's late sister. The sight unsettled him. His sister had died years ago, but seeing Evelina surrounded by her clothes made the past feel dangerously close. Dr. Mercer assured him that Evelina was exhausted but would recover if she rested. The baby, though chilled, appeared healthy. Only then did Alistair allow himself to breathe. He stood near the window, watching rain slide down the glass. "Why were you abandoned?" Evelina lowered her eyes. "I cannot tell you." "You can." "No." His jaw tightened. "You are the wife of Edmund Wycliffe. Your husband leaves you on a road during a storm with a newborn child. Armed men may already be searching for you. Whatever secret you are protecting is no longer yours alone." Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "You should have left me there." The words struck harder than he expected. "Why?" "Because you hate my family." "I do. And you hate me." Alistair looked at her. "That is what I believed." She raised her eyes. The firelight softened her face, but exhaustion could not hide the familiar curve of her mouth, the small crease beside her left eye when she was troubled. A memory surfaced. A garden 5 years ago. A young woman laughing beneath an oak. Eva. He forced the memory away. Then Evelina reached instinctively toward the pendant at her throat. Alistair went still. "Where did you get that?" She covered it with her hand. "It was given to me." "By whom?" She said nothing. His voice lowered. "Lady Wycliffe." She flinched at the title. "Please." That single word was not the voice of Edmund's wife. It belonged to someone frightened of what the answer might awaken. Alistair stepped closer. "I gave that pendant to someone once." Her breathing changed. "Someone I loved." Evelina closed her eyes. He remembered the woman called Eva as vividly as if she had walked into the room. He remembered her letters, her laughter, the warmth of her hand beneath his. He remembered promising to marry her. Then he remembered his brother's blood. He remembered the Wycliffe name. He remembered learning that Eva had married Edmund. His heart had turned to stone that day. Yet now the woman wearing his pendant sat before him, pale and trembling. "Where did you get it?" he asked again. Evelina looked at him. For one suspended moment, neither hatred nor grief existed between them. There was only recognition struggling to break through 5 years of lies. Alistair reached toward the pendant but stopped before touching it. His hand fell to his side. "Who were you," he whispered, "before you became Lady Wycliffe?" Evelina's eyes filled with tears. The realization frightened him. If she was Eva, then every accusation he had carried against her might have been built upon a lie. And if she was not, he would have to explain why her presence beside his fire had reopened a wound he had sworn was dead. And Alistair knew, before she answered, that the woman he had spent 5 years mourning might never have been lost at all. For a long moment, Evelina could not speak. The fire cracked as rain whispered against the windows. Alistair stood several feet away, rigid with the patience of a man afraid that one answer might destroy what remained of his certainty. At last she touched the silver pendant. "You gave it to me." His face changed. 5 years disappeared. He saw a country chapel washed in summer light, its weathered stones warmed by afternoon sun. He saw a young woman standing beside the old oak, her brown hair loose in the breeze, a book held against her chest. Eva. He had met her there by accident. At first, she was merely a stranger who smiled when he complained about the rain. He had been 29 then, already carrying the weight of his title and expectations that had never belonged to him. She had treated him as though he were simply a man. They met again the following week. Then again. Their meetings became the secret architecture of a life neither dared name. They walked through gardens after dusk. They traded books and letters. She teased him when he became too serious. He pretended to dislike it. Once, beneath the same oak where he had found her that night, she asked what he wanted from life. "Peace," he answered. She smiled. "Then perhaps you should stop fighting everyone." He had laughed. He remembered it now and it hurt. Back in the hunting lodge, Evelina watched the memory move across his face. "I waited for you," she said. Alistair's voice was barely audible. "I came back." "I know." "Then why?" Her eyes lowered. "Because you never found me." The answer carried years of sorrow. After Alistair's brother was murdered, everything had changed. The Ravenscrofts blamed the Wycliffes. Evidence had appeared pointing toward Evelina's father. Alistair had disappeared into grief and fury before she could reach him. At the same time, her father discovered their secret. He forbade her from returning to the chapel. Her letters to Alistair were confiscated. Every attempt to escape ended with another threat against her family. Then Edmund appeared. He was charming, patient, and perfectly aware of her vulnerability. "He told my father he could settle our family's debts," Evelina said. "He promised security. He promised protection." Alistair's expression hardened. "What did he promise you?" "Nothing." The answer cut through the room. "He knew I loved someone else. He knew it was you. That was why he wanted me." Alistair stared at her. Evelina remembered the day she had been forced to accept the ring. Her hands had been cold. Her father's voice had been merciless. Edmund had smiled as though he had won something valuable. She had hoped Alistair would somehow appear. He never did. "I thought you chose him," Alistair said. "I thought you had forgotten me." "Forgotten you?" His restraint cracked. "I spent years believing you had looked at everything we promised and decided I was not enough. You were never the reason." He turned away. His shoulders rose with a slow breath, as though he were fighting the urge to break something. "I mourned you while you were alive." Evelina's eyes filled. "I mourned you too." Silence settled between them. For the first time, Alistair looked not at Lady Wycliffe, but at the woman he had loved. Then his gaze moved to Thomas sleeping near the fire. "Is he Edmund's son?" Evelina stiffened. "He is my son." "That was not my question." Her expression became guarded. "Thomas is innocent. That is all that matters." Alistair nodded slowly, but suspicion remained in his eyes. He wanted to ask more, yet knew the question would wound her. He returned to the ledger. "You said Edmund knew about us. If he discovered the ledger, why did he abandon you rather than destroy it?" "Because he thought I had not understood what it contained." "And you did." "I understood enough." She looked toward the window. "The payments, the names, the dates, the references to your brother's death." Alistair went motionless. "You are certain?" "I saw Edmund sign them." His voice turned cold. "Then he murdered my brother." "I believe he did." 5 years of hatred suddenly stood on a different foundation. Alistair had built his life around vengeance. He had punished Wycliffe tenants, ruined alliances, and carried his family's grief like armor. Yet the woman before him had spent those years imprisoned by the man he believed was merely her husband. He looked at her hand. The wedding ring remained there, a symbol of a marriage she had never chosen. Evelina removed it. She placed it on the table between them. "I am not his wife in my heart," she whispered. Alistair looked at the ring, then at her. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" "Because by the time I could, you had already learned to hate me." The words silenced him. Outside, thunder rolled away into the distance. The storm seemed to be weakening. But inside Alistair, something more dangerous had begun. "Oh." He stepped closer. "Did you ever stop loving me?" Evelina lifted her eyes to his. She did not answer. The tears along her lashes were enough. Alistair understood then that the woman he had spent 5 years mourning had never betrayed him. She had been waiting for him all along. Evelina sat beside the dying fire, watching the flames consume themselves into red embers. For the first time in years she had spoken aloud the truth she had carried alone. Yet confession had not brought relief. It had opened every wound she had learned to conceal. Alistair remained near the window. "Tell me everything," he said. She looked at him. "You may hate me when you hear it. I already spent 5 years hating you." His voice was quiet, but the pain beneath it was unmistakable. "I would rather hate the truth than love another lie." Evelina lowered her eyes. "Edmund knew about us before our wedding." Alistair's jaw tightened. "He found one of your letters." "My letters?" "The ones I tried to send you after your brother died. My father intercepted them. Edmund somehow obtained one." She remembered that night with painful clarity. Edmund had placed the letter before her at dinner, his smile almost gentle. "You still love him," he had said. She had refused to answer. "That makes this very simple." He had threatened her younger sister, her mother's security, and the future of everyone who depended upon the Wycliffe estate. Then he offered a choice that was no choice at all. Marry him or watch her family lose everything. "I refused at first," Evelina whispered. "For weeks." "What changed?" "He showed me how easily he could destroy them." Alistair's hands curled into fists. "So you surrendered." "I survived." The distinction struck him. After their wedding, Edmund had not behaved like a husband. He had behaved like a jailer who preferred velvet chains. He controlled every letter that entered Wycliffe Hall. He questioned every visitor. He decided which rooms Evelina could use and which relatives she could see. When she asked about Alistair, Edmund smiled and reminded her that Ravenscroft blood had already stained the ground between their families. Then Thomas was born. For a brief season, motherhood gave Evelina something Edmund could not control. She loved the child with a fierceness that frightened even her. Edmund changed after Thomas's birth. He began watching her more carefully. One evening, while searching for a medical receipt in his study, Evelina discovered a false panel behind a cabinet. Inside was a leather ledger. She opened it. Names, dates, payments. She recognized one name immediately, the man who had testified that Alistair's brother had been seen arguing with a Wycliffe servant on the night of the murder. The witness had been paid. Another entry carried a date 2 days before the murder. Another listed a shipment of weapons. Then she saw Edmund's initials beside a payment made to a man whose name she knew only from whispered rumors. Her hands went cold. She understood then that the feud had not begun with murder. It had begun with a plan. "I took the ledger," she said. Alistair stared at her. "I hid it because I knew Edmund would kill me if he found it." "Did he?" "He discovered it was missing." Her voice faltered. "He came to my room that night. He asked where I had put it. I told him I had burned it." Alistair's expression darkened. "He believed you?" "No." She looked toward Thomas. "He searched everywhere. Then he looked at my son." Something cold moved through Alistair. "He threatened the baby?" "He said that accidents happen to children whose mothers make foolish choices." The room seemed to shrink around them. Evelina pressed her hands together to stop their trembling. "That was when I knew I had to run." She had not been allowed to leave. So Edmund had chosen for her. He had arranged the carriage, ordered the driver to abandon her, and trusted the storm to erase the problem. Alistair crossed the room. "You should have come to me." Evelina laughed once without humor. "Would you have believed me?" He had no answer. She looked at him with exhausted honesty. "You would have seen an enemy's wife carrying accusations against your family. You would have thought it another Wycliffe trick." Alistair absorbed the truth. She was right. That realization hurt more than anger. "I would believe you now." Evelina looked up. "Why?" "Because I have seen what he did to you." For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then a sharp crack sounded outside. Alistair turned toward the door. A shadow crossed the window. He drew his pistol. "Stay here." The door burst inward. A masked man lunged into the room. Alistair met him before he could reach Evelina. They crashed against the table, sending papers flying. The attacker struck Alistair across the shoulder, but the Duke drove him backward and tore away his mask. The man's face was unfamiliar. He twisted free and fled through the rear door. Alistair followed to the threshold, but the darkness swallowed him. Then a voice carried through the rain. "The Duke won't live long enough to learn what really happened." Alistair returned slowly. Evelina stood beside the fire, pale and rigid. The message was clear. Edmund knew where she was. and someone was willing to kill Alistair to keep the truth buried. By dawn, the storm had weakened to a cold drizzle, but Alistair knew the hunting lodge was no longer safe. The masked attacker had left too many questions behind. Someone had known Evelina was there. Someone had known about the ledger. And someone had been bold enough to threaten a duke under his own roof. "We leave within the hour," Alistair said. Evelina looked toward Thomas, sleeping peacefully in the nurse's arms. "Where?" "Ravenscroft." Her expression tightened. "Your family will not welcome me. My family will obey me." The words were calm, but there was iron beneath them. Ravenscroft Castle rose from the mist that afternoon, its towers dark against the pale sky. For generations, it had been the fortress of the Ravenscrofts, a magnificent house built upon wealth, grief, and pride. Its stone walls seemed less like a home than a warning. Evelina stared at it from the carriage window. "I remember seeing it once," she said. Alistair glanced at her. "From the road?" "Yes. Before my marriage." He understood what she meant without asking. Before everything had been ruined. The carriage passed beneath the iron gates. Servants gathered in the courtyard, their faces carefully blank until they saw who was beside the Duke. Whispers began immediately. "A Wycliffe. Lady Evelina Wycliffe. In Ravenscroft Castle." Alistair heard every murmur and ignored them. He carried Thomas inside while Evelina followed, her posture straight despite the exhaustion etched beneath her eyes. The great hall swallowed them in cold grandeur. Portraits of dead Ravenscrofts watched from the walls. Among them was Alistair's younger brother, painted at 19 with an open smile and a sword at his side. Evelina stopped. Her face drained of color. "That is him." Alistair looked at the portrait. "My brother. I remember seeing that portrait years ago. You never told me. You never gave me the chance." The words were gentle, yet they cut. Before he could answer, footsteps sounded above them. Lady Beatrice Ravenscroft descended the staircase. She was Alistair's aunt, a formidable woman whose loyalty to the family had hardened into something almost cruel. Her eyes settled on Evelina, then on Thomas. "So," she said, "the Wycliffe bride has come to Ravenscroft." Evelina remained silent. Beatrice smiled without warmth. "How convenient. Your husband abandons you, and you find shelter with the man whose family he betrayed." Alistair's expression changed. "Enough." Beatrice lifted her chin. "I am merely saying what everyone else is thinking. Then everyone else can learn silence." The hall went still. Alistair turned to a servant. "Prepare Lady Wycliffe's rooms beside mine." Beatrice stared. "Alistair, is there a problem?" "She is a Wycliffe. And she is under my protection." The words carried through the hall like a drawn blade. Evelina looked at him, startled. Beatrice's mouth tightened. "You would disgrace your brother's memory for her?" Alistair's eyes hardened. "I would not disgrace him by condemning an innocent woman." That ended the argument. Later, in the library, Alistair placed Edmund's ledger beneath the lamp. Evelina stood opposite him. They examined the entries together. Payments to witnesses. Money transferred through London banks. Names connected to men who had disappeared after Alistair's brother died. Then Alistair found something that made his blood run cold. A Ravenscroft name. He checked the entry again. The handwriting was Edmund's, but the recipient was one of Alistair's own relatives. "No," he whispered. Evelina stepped closer. "Who is it?" He turned the ledger toward her. She read the name. Her eyes widened. "Your uncle?" Alistair nodded. The man who had comforted him at his brother's funeral. The man who had sworn revenge beside him. The man who had encouraged his hatred for the Wycliffes for 15 years. His hand tightened around the page. "He was there when my brother died." Evelina reached across the desk and touched his wrist. Alistair looked at her hand. She immediately began to withdraw it. He caught it gently. Neither spoke. For one fragile moment, the castle felt less cold. Then footsteps sounded beyond the library door. A servant entered, visibly shaken. "Your Grace, there are riders at the gates." Alistair released Evelina's hand. "Who?" The servant swallowed. "Lord Edmund Wycliffe." Behind him stood several royal officers. And Edmund had come to take his wife back. Evelina's breath caught. For an instant, she looked like the woman beneath the oak again, abandoned and defenseless. Alistair saw the fear before she concealed it. "Do not be afraid," he said. "I am not afraid for myself." "Thomas?" She nodded. Alistair stepped between her and the doorway. "No one takes him from you." Her eyes searched his face. "You cannot fight everyone who comes for me." "No," he said. but I can decide whom I allow through my doors. He walked toward the library entrance. Behind him, Evelina gathered Thomas into her arms. The child stirred, then settled against her shoulder. Alistair paused beside the portrait of his brother. For years that face had demanded vengeance. Now for the first time it seemed to ask something else. Truth. He turned toward the approaching footsteps with a certainty he had never possessed before. Whatever Edmund had planned, he would not surrender Evelina. Not again. Not to the man who had broken her. And not to the lies that had already stolen 5 years from them. Doors opened, and Edmund's arrival seemed to darken the corridors, as though darkness followed him behind. Edmund entered Ravenscroft Castle as though he had every right to command it. 2 royal officers followed him through the great doors, their boots striking the marble floor with deliberate authority. Behind them stood several armed men from Wycliffe lands. Evelina remained at the top of the staircase, Thomas held tightly against her. Edmund looked up. For one heartbeat, surprise crossed his face. Then his familiar smile returned. My dear Evelina. She felt Alistair move beside her. Do not call her that, he said. Edmund's gaze shifted toward him. Your Grace. How touching. I had heard my wife had been found, but I never imagined you would shelter her. She was abandoned during a storm with a newborn. A misunderstanding. Alistair descended 1 step. Your driver left her on a deserted road. Edmund shrugged. Perhaps she was being punished for stealing from me. Evelina's fingers tightened around Thomas. She stole nothing that belonged to you, Alistair said. Edmund smiled. That remains to be proven. He produced a sealed document. By order of the Crown, Lady Wycliffe is to return with me while an investigation is conducted into her theft, her interference in my affairs, and the unlawful removal of my property. His eyes settled deliberately on the child. And my son. Evelina went pale. Alistair stepped forward. You will not threaten her with the child. I am not threatening anyone. You are. The room seemed to contract around them. Edmund glanced at the gathered servants. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No. Alistair's voice carried through the hall. You wanted witnesses. You shall have them. He turned to the steward. Bring the ledger. Evelina's breath caught. The steward returned carrying the leather book. Edmund's smile disappeared. Alistair opened it. Payments to witnesses. Bribes to officials. Money sent to men connected with my brother's murder. Edmund laughed. A forged ledger. Evelina stepped forward. It is not forged. Every face turned toward her. I saw Edmund write those entries. You expect them to believe a frightened wife? I expect them to believe the evidence. She pointed toward a page. That signature is his. So is the notation beside it. Edmund's expression hardened. You have always been cleverer than was convenient. Alistair closed the ledger. Who ordered my brother's death? Edmund said nothing. Answer me. I had nothing to do with it. Then an old man entered the hall. He walked slowly, leaning upon a cane. Evelina recognized him from Wycliffe Hall. The former stable master. His face was gray with fear. I did, he whispered. I saw him. Edmund turned. Get that old fool out. The stable master raised his voice. I saw Lord Edmund meet the men beside the east gate that night. I heard him order them to make certain Lord Ravenscroft never reached home. Silence fell. Alistair stared at him. You are certain? I have carried the truth in my graveyard of a heart for 15 years. The old man pulled a folded paper from his coat. This was the payment. Alistair took it. The seal was Edmund's. Edmund lunged toward him, but the officers seized his arms. You will regret this, Edmund snarled. No, Alistair replied. You will. But Edmund was not finished. He looked at Evelina. If I fall, you fall with me. Her face tightened. You have nothing left to threaten me with. Oh, I have one thing. His eyes moved toward Thomas. The room filled with a sudden, poisonous silence. Edmund laughed softly. You all assume that child gives you victory. Evelina pulled Thomas closer. Do not. I only question whether he is truly mine. A murmur swept through the hall. Evelina looked stricken. Alistair moved immediately, placing himself between them. You will not use an innocent child to hide your crimes. Edmund smiled. Ask your beloved Eva what happened before she became my wife. Alistair's expression turned cold. She owes you nothing. Then ask why she never told you about the child. Evelina closed her eyes. She had endured Edmund's cruelty for years, but this accusation struck at the deepest fear he could still reach. Thomas stirred against her shoulder. Alistair looked back at her. Evelina. She met his eyes. I swear to you, she whispered, whatever Edmund says, Thomas is innocent. I know. The certainty in his voice steadied her. Then the stable master spoke again. There is more. Alistair turned. The old man swallowed. Edmund did not act alone. He pointed toward the ledger. One of your own blood helped him. Alistair's face went rigid. Who? The stable master looked toward the portrait gallery. Your uncle. The name seemed to strike the castle itself. Alistair stared at the portrait of the man who had stood beside him at his brother's funeral, who had fed his hatred, who had urged him toward revenge. Evelina reached for Alistair's hand. He allowed her fingers to close around his. For 15 years he had believed the enemy stood across the border between two estates. Now he understood the enemy had been standing inside his own home. Edmund suddenly tore free from the officers and ran. A shot cracked through the hall, splintering the doorframe as he fled into the darkness. Alistair started after him. Then he saw where Edmund was going. The old chapel. The place where Eva had once promised him forever. The place where the first lie had begun. And Alistair knew truth waited there for them. Alistair rode through the darkness with Edmund's escape burning like a brand in his mind. The old chapel stood beyond the western woods, its broken bell tower visible whenever lightning tore open the clouds. Years ago he had believed that place belonged to memory. Tonight it belonged to truth. He dismounted before the ruined doors. Edmund was already inside. Come alone, Edmund called, or your precious Evelina dies. Alistair froze. He had expected cowardice, not another threat. Then he heard movement behind the chapel. Evelina. She had followed him. Alistair. Edmund laughed. You should have left her behind. Evelina stepped through the doorway, pale but resolute. I will not let you face him alone. Alistair turned toward her. For a moment anger flashed through him. Then he understood. She was no longer the woman abandoned beneath the oak. She had survived the storm, the marriage, the lies, and the fear. She was standing beside him because she had chosen to. Edmund emerged from the shadows, pistol raised. You always were sentimental, he said. Alistair stepped between the weapon and Evelina. You murdered my brother. I gave you what you wanted. The words struck with brutal precision. You wanted a Wycliffe enemy. I gave you one. Your uncle wanted the same. Alistair's face hardened. You destroyed two families. No. I made them destroy themselves. Thunder rolled overhead. Edmund smiled. You think justice will satisfy you? Your brother is still dead. 15 years are still gone. And she is still my wife. Evelina removed her wedding ring. She let it fall onto the chapel floor. No, she said. I was never yours. Edmund's expression twisted. He raised the pistol. Alistair moved. The shot exploded through the chapel. Evelina screamed. Alistair struck Edmund's wrist, sending the pistol skidding across the stones. The two men crashed against the ruined altar. Years of hatred poured into the struggle. Alistair could have killed him. He had the strength. He had the reason. Edmund fell beneath him, bleeding and terrified. Do it, Edmund gasped. Be the man I made you. Alistair's fist remained raised. His brother's face appeared in his memory. Then Evelina beneath the oak. Then Thomas sleeping against her heart. He realized Edmund was offering him the final weapon of the feud, hatred disguised as justice. Alistair slowly lowered his fist. No. Edmund stared. I will not become you. He dragged Edmund to his feet and handed him to the waiting officers outside. Take him. Edmund fought as they bound his wrists. This changes nothing. It changes everything, Alistair answered. The officers led him away into the rain. Silence returned to the chapel. Evelina stood beside the broken altar, trembling. Alistair approached her. Are you hurt? She shook her head. I was afraid for you. He looked at her as though the answer had reached somewhere no accusation ever could. For me? For the man I thought I had lost. He closed his eyes briefly. I nearly lost myself. She stepped closer. Because of him? Because of hatred. Alistair looked toward the doorway where Edmund had disappeared. For 15 years I thought revenge was the only thing keeping my brother's memory alive. I was wrong. Evelina reached for his hand. He took it. Her fingers were cold. He warmed them between his palms. I should have found you, he whispered. You did. Too late. Not anymore. His eyes filled with emotion he no longer tried to hide. I loved you when you were Eva. I know. I loved you when I believed you had betrayed me. She breathed in sharply. And now? He lifted her hand to his lips. Now I know the truth. He kissed her fingers. I love you, Evelina. She closed her eyes. For 5 years she had imagined hearing those words again. She had never imagined they would come after so much pain. I love you too. Outside, the rain began to soften. Alistair looked at the chapel where they had once dreamed of a future. Will you come home with me? Evelina smiled through tears. Which home? He looked toward Ravenscroft. The one we will make. She rested her forehead against his. For the first time since the feud began, neither family name stood between them. Only tomorrow. And when Alistair took her hand and led her beneath the broken archway, Evelina understood that the Duke had finally chosen the one thing revenge could never give him: a future. Behind them, the old chapel seemed to breathe with the release of a burden it had carried for years. The cracked stones had witnessed their first promises, their separation, and now the ending of the lie that had poisoned them. Alistair paused beneath the doorway and looked back once. His brother's memory no longer demanded blood. It demanded that he live. Evelina understood the change in his face. You are thinking of him. Yes. Does it hurt? It always will. She slipped her hand into his again. But it no longer has to hurt alone. He looked down at their joined hands. A faint smile touched his mouth. No, he said. It does not. They walked into the rain together, leaving Edmund's threats, the ruined feud, and the ghosts of 5 bitter years behind them. Yet neither knew how profoundly their choice would change Ravenscroft Castle, the Wycliffe estate, and every life bound to their names before the first dawn came. Spring came softly to Ravenscroft. The first morning without fear arrived almost unnoticed. Sunlight spilled through the eastern windows, touching the ancient stone walls with gold, while birds sang in the gardens that had known too many years of silence. Evelina stood before the nursery window with Thomas in her arms. He had grown stronger in the months since the storm. His cheeks were round now, his dark eyes bright with curiosity, and his tiny hand remained stubbornly wrapped around one of her fingers. She smiled down at him. You were very determined to survive, little one. Behind her, the door opened. Alistair entered without announcing himself. He had changed. The Duke who once walked Ravenscroft like a man carrying an invisible sword no longer seemed imprisoned by his own anger. He still possessed the authority that made servants straighten when he passed, but the coldness had gone from his eyes. He crossed the room and kissed Evelina's forehead. How is my favorite man? Thomas answered with an indignant sound. Alistair smiled. I deserve that. Evelina watched him lift the child into his arms. There had been a time when she could not have imagined this sight, the feared Duke of Ravenscroft holding the son of Edmund Wycliffe with such tenderness. The feud had ended. Edmund had been taken to prison. His crimes had become impossible to conceal. Alistair's uncle had confessed his part in the conspiracy, and the evidence had cleared Evelina's family name. For the first time in 15 years, Ravenscroft and Wycliffe no longer stood on opposite sides of a battlefield created by lies. Yet Evelina knew peace was not simply the absence of danger. Peace had to be learned. She was learning it every day. So was Alistair. You are quiet, he said. I was remembering the storm. His smile faded. So was I. Evelina looked toward the window. Sometimes I still wonder how I survived that night. Alistair came closer. You survived because you refused to surrender. I was terrified. I know. I thought Thomas and I would die beneath that tree. Alistair gently touched her cheek. But you didn't. No. She looked at him. You found us. He shook his head. No. I think we found each other. Her eyes filled. He kissed her softly. That afternoon, Alistair took Evelina beyond the gardens to the ancient oak. The tree stood exactly as it had during the storm, its immense branches reaching toward the clear sky. But everything around it had changed. Wildflowers covered the earth beneath its roots. Evelina stopped. I remember thinking I would never see spring. Alistair took her hand. You were wrong. She smiled. I am pleased about that. He led her beneath the branches. There is something I want you to see. A few steps away stood the restored countryside chapel. Its broken stones had been repaired. Its roof had been rebuilt. The old wooden doors had been replaced, but the weathered cross above them remained. Evelina stared. You restored it. For us. Her breath caught. Alistair. He turned toward her. 5 years ago, I promised a woman named Eva that I would come for her when the world stopped fighting us. He reached into his coat. The silver pendant rested in his palm. I was too late then. He placed it gently around her neck. But I am here now. Tears slipped down her cheeks. He lowered himself to one knee. Evelina covered her mouth. "Will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears. "You are asking me now? I thought it was safer than asking while your husband was still trying to kill me." She laughed again, and Alistair's expression softened. "Yes," she whispered. Then stronger, "Yes." He rose and kissed her beneath the oak. Weeks later, the chapel filled with sunlight. There were no political negotiations, no forced promises, and no families demanding obedience. There was only choice. Evelina walked toward Alistair wearing a simple ivory gown. Thomas rested in the arms of the old nurse near the altar, dressed in white. When Evelina reached Alistair, he took both her hands. His voice trembled only once. "I spent years believing love made me weak." She smiled. "And now I know it was the hatred that made me weak." Her eyes shone. The vows were spoken. The rings exchanged. And when Alistair kissed his wife, the chapel bells began to ring. Outside, the people of both estates gathered beneath the spring sky. Some had once expected another war. Instead, they witnessed its ending. Later, Evelina carried Thomas beneath the oak. Alistair joined her. The baby reached for him. Alistair lifted him and laughed when Thomas seized his collar. Evelina watched them, her heart almost painfully full. "This is not how I imagined my life," she said. Alistair looked at her. "Neither did I." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever regret choosing mercy?" He looked toward the distant hills. "No." Then he looked at his wife and son. "Not for a single moment." The wind moved through the branches above them. Evelina closed her eyes. She could almost hear the storm again, the rain, the thunder, her own frightened whisper beneath the oak. But the memory no longer frightened her. That night had once seemed like the end of everything. Instead, it had been the beginning. She had arrived beneath the tree believing she had been abandoned by the entire world. She had left it carrying a different future. Alistair slipped his arm around her waist. "Come home." She smiled. "I am home." He kissed her temple. Thomas slept peacefully between them. Above their heads, sunlight filtered through the ancient branches, illuminating the place where Evelina had once nursed her baby in desperation. Now flowers grew there. Now laughter lived there. Now love had taken root. And the Duke who had once ridden into the storm seeking an enemy had found something far greater than revenge. He had found the woman he had loved all along. He had found his son. He had found forgiveness. And at last he had found home.